Go live, go live. Light on Suitability. Welcome to Light on Suitability. I'm your host, Elizabeth Comeau, with my co-hosts, Joe Haytas and Dean Laurellis. We're talking about Joe's book today, 36 Strategies of Suitability, and we're on strategy 14. We're kind of doing another, like the way you work the Course in Miracles, you do the whole thing, lessons 1 through 365, and then you circle back at January 1st and you do the same thing over again. That's what we're doing with Joe's book. I think after this book, we're going to do his new book, which has a very interesting title, but we shall see. We shall see. Today, we're talking strategy 14, which is an interesting title, UFO'S and Suitability, reverse engineering your way to suitability. I'm very curious about the title. Joe, can you fill us in on what's going on?
Well, I could have called this chapter anything like "Don't Reinvent the Wheel," but UFO, it's like reverse engineering. At Area 51 when they get a craft, an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and the government goes in and looks at it and tries to reverse engineer it by taking any technology they can use to adapt to a military use or for a civilian use. And so what I'm saying is everybody's case, even though the case, what happened is unique. However, rehabilitation, if you follow certain rules of like what other people have done in the past, and you do it diligently, sincerely, you don't. There's no mystery around your rehabilitation programming, and so I took one person's who was granted parole, and by the way, he had like an ungodly amount of placement points. He had like 150, but they had built up over time. And he did all of these things that are outlined in the book. And so if you're able to do each one of these, it really will enhance your chances of getting a grant of parole. It's not guaranteed, but it certainly will get you a lot closer. So that's what this list comes from. Everything that this individual did, and he had a pretty violent crime. So, but he was a changed person, and I just took all the things that he did and put it into this chapter. So. I was thinking of using this actually as an outline for the new book, but it'd be too easy. That's what I think anybody, like it says in the book of Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun. Well, there is nothing new under the sun. And to get a grant, to use these as your checklist, you're going to be very close to a grant if you can do all of these.
And by all of these, I think Joe's talking about, what we've sort of talked about all the way along.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at, okay, insight.
And by the way, there's 36. When I say all of these, I meant there's 36 points in here. I guess that's a coincidence. 36 points of what this person did to rehabilitate.
Right. And you used like someone who was in a gang, so he had to reconstruct, like, if you're from a gang, sometimes having to explain your moniker, the tattoos. If they see tattoos on you, they're going to talk about those, the violence, criminal thinking, criminal activity. talking about who he or she was, why he or she lived that way, and he or she, and what changed. The courage to drop out of the gang lifestyle is going to be talked about because everybody knows how much courage it takes. But then Joe's saying, like, unpack that. How did it begin? And then how did it begin to unravel, meaning going toward a different path? And like Joe's talking about in the chapter, programming, a lot of soul searching and a rigorous honesty is what they talk about in the big book. And then, and they're all our female gang members. My client just debriefed from a very serious gang, a subset actually of a cartel gang. But he circles back to always, insight, honesty, internalization. Like you said, study real examples of people who are getting granted parole and be able to do that same process with your own and in great detail. Yeah. Speaking of which, I'll tell you guys about some good news that I had. It's never as good as you as you want, but my LWAP client, who just debriefed, didn't need to, but she did, was finally resentenced, or will be resentenced to something to life, 24 to life, or I don't know, 10 plus life plus life. So she's going to get in the youthful offender law. She'll get a parole hearing in 20 years.
In 20 years?
In 20 years, yeah.
Well, how long has she served so far?
She has served 15 and a bit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So great news. I was promised credit for time served, but that person left, and a new administration and new people and blah, blah, blah. And that's the other person that took over for him, that argued for her, said that was all he could squeeze out of him. And of course, my client said, I have no problem with that. It's always the lawyers that are complaining. So anyway, she did have to reinvent herself, because when she went in very defiant, very stubborn, very stuck to her story. But she was able to, through her honesty, through her programming, through all of the stuff you talk about in this chapter and others, show someone who's very skeptical that she was very, very different than the girl, the 18-year-old that participated in those kidnaps. So yeah, it's a win. It's hard to take it as a win when you were promised credit for time served and out by Christmas and all that stuff. But that's okay. She's happy. She's getting a parole hearing in 2 years, and she's not the one doing the complaining. Dean, what have you got?
Well, it's when I look at the title, the reverse engineering, and what that says to me is going back to the beginning. Some organizations have programs connecting the dots. They have different phrases that they use, but I think it's all the same thing. And it's a big part of what we do is going back and looking at childhood traumatic events and seeing the beliefs, the behaviors, and the feelings that were created through that, and how does that play out into the adulthood criminality. And it's just going to the back. And then when you can identify the things that have happened and the beliefs that were developed, and then now how can you look at it differently to change those beliefs, and that's what helps create the new behaviors. It's, for a person who was abused physically as a child, growing up, hating their father, dealing with all this stuff. But in that time, the beliefs that were created were violent. They were also abusive beliefs. And for myself, it's like, that's how I grew up. And so I grew up, as much as I could not stand my father the way he was, I grew up to be exactly like him. And so I had to go back and identify those beliefs and identify what came, how did this influence my behaviors, and then readdress those, create the new beliefs, look at things through a new perspective, which led to the new behaviors. And for me, that's the reverse engineering, going back, using what we call a past focus approach of CBT into a current focus approach, being able to develop those new behaviors. And it's for a lot of people, it's like you've got to live in it for a while. I've had clients who call and they say, well, I don't go to the board for 4 years. Is it too early to start working with you? And I say, no, we need you now, because what you're going to learn from us, we need you to implement into your lifestyle. And by the time you go to the board, it's part of your lifestyle. And when you're answering questions, you're just talking about the way you're living, and it's that much simpler. So that's we need that. And I think that with the reverse engineering, that's what it says to me, is like, let's go back to the beginning and let's work forward again and see what's there. I just had a client yesterday who I was working with, Friday, and we go a lot back into his past, and we talk about a lot of the traumatic events and things that he faced and that he dealt with, and just being able to identify what took place and how that influences his behaviors. Going back to myself, I grew up alcoholism, domestic violence, womanizing, violent behavior, authoritarian beliefs. And that was what I was raised in. So, when I went to the board, the commissioners asked me, they said, do you just not like women? And I said, no. I said, I'm no, that's not the issue. And they said, well, why do you have this domestic violence in you? What is the problem here? And I said, well, I never had a healthy role model into what a healthy relationship looks like. So I knew what I learned from childhood, and that's, of course, what I implemented throughout adulthood, and we see where that got me. So, it's about changing the beliefs. So then their next question, well, what does a healthy relationship look like? So we talked about that for a while. But I think it's just going the reverse engineering, simply in simple terms, going back to the beginning. You know what I mean? Just identifying those things, connecting the dots, and being able to have the insight to speak on it. And personally, I think that that's what the board is looking for. They want to see that that's one of the things they're looking for, that you can connect the dots. You see where the behaviors came from. You see what started. You see what made it okay. What did you get out of committing the offenses? And that's the insight, and then how the next logical question for me is, then how do we know that you're not going to do this again? So what they're asking for is coping skills. How do we know that you're going to be able to address this? So then you share your insights into that and the way that you're living. But that's what that says to me. The UFOs and suitability, that would have thrown me a little bit until I read the second part of it. And then I was like, okay, I got that.
Okay.
Yeah, I get it. The Area 51, if they have an unidentified flying object, then they take it apart to try and figure it out. Lately, too, these commissioners are, I don't know. The one DC started, these commissioners and their gotcha questions. I don't know about that. They cross-examine. What do you had a gun, and the gun was this, and you knew it was there, and then all these simple little yes and no questions, and then bam, they ask you the gotcha question. I don't know. I don't know about that tactic. And then also another question is, what is antisocial personality disorder and all of the criteria under the DSM? It's like, oh, okay. So get ready for that one. That one's coming a lot. I've heard more and more attorneys saying that they're expecting clients to know what antisocial personality disorder is. And when they give the answer that, oh, it's friendly with people, being friendly and having a lot of friends, and they just know that you haven't been to groups, I guess. So
Right.
Just have them reread their risk assessment, and if there's a diagnosis given. And then as an attorney, I've been going over what it is. As long as they can get a couple of those criteria answered, it seems fine. But another question coming is, and a lot of this has to do with misapprehension, basically, as to what youthful offender factors mean, is, having having these commissioners viewing a youthful offender through an adult lens. And I'm like, that's not supposed to be happening here. And also asking them, well, if you didn't like your father was doing and you said you didn't like it, so why would you do that if you didn't like it? And it's really like, and then you explain, well, because that's what I saw growing up. And they go, but you said you didn't like it. And then you get into this circular BS with them. And,
Well,
I had a hearing this week too. Right off the bat, we knew she had already made up her mind. And so all the questions were geared toward building their record to deny parole, period, because there was victims and something else. And you could just tell. And I took a break and told my client she'd already decided she's building her case to deny you parole. He goes, I get that. I get that very loudly and clearly myself, my client said. So.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that you said, Elizabeth, that, when you talked about, the gotcha questions, my perspective has changed over the years on that. And the way I look at it is that we all know that the commissioners have a very tough job. They're the gatekeepers of society to make sure that, they don't let out the wrong people. And I'm a firm believer that whatever tactics they use to see if a person is suitable is fine by me, because if that person is truly suitable, they will be able to get through the questioning. And if those gotcha questions and things like that, that's just some of the tools they have in the toolbox to determine whether or not a person's suitable. If a guy gets frustrated, if he gets lost and confused and jumps, then okay, you're not suitable. It's not your time yet. And the other thing, the anti-personal personality, the guy that I was working with Friday, he got his CRA back. 3 things that they listed. The clinician said that, your character defects, you're reckless, you're irresponsible, and your impulsivity. And so he says, okay, so what is that? I said, well, those are 3 of the characteristics that are anti-personality disorder. Now, a lot of people aren't diagnosed with it, but most of us carry characteristics of some of those traits. And so those are 3 of them. And he says, well, how do I work on that? And I said, well, it's simple. And you'll like this, because this goes to spiritual principles. Practice doing the opposite of. Instead of being impulsive, be patient. Instead of being reckless, be careful. And be responsible rather than irresponsible. And so just getting into the habit of living the opposite of. If you're selfish, then live in selflessness. And when they ask that question about, well, if you went through something and you didn't like it, well, why did you turn around and do it? Because me personally, and I think this fits for most guys, is that because I was that selfish. What was more important to me at the time in that moment was getting what I wanted, whatever that was, rather than caring about hurting somebody else, or what I felt about them. So putting myself and my selfishness is why I was able to do that, and with that, it's from what I've seen and what I've read in a lot of transcripts from my own personal experiences, the commissioners are pretty much just like, okay, on to the next topic, because it's answering the question, and it doesn't really leave them with another outlet to go into.
Way to go. Yeah, for sure. What else do you see? What's on the horizon, Joe? Strategy 15.
Strategy 15. That would be, what Dean just mentioned, the comprehensive risk assessment.
Good.
Using it as a dress rehearsal for the hearing.
Right. I remember that in your book. It is a dress rehearsal. Good times. Okay. And football? Anything good going on?
Well, it's December. That's a loaded question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I started watching more of the college than I think my Steelers are pretty much out of it, so I've been watching some of the college.
I see. Oh, I didn't know. I don't know anything about it. How about your Browns? I think you mentioned the Browns.
No, don't talk about the Browns, please.
Oh, no. Oh, I thought that was your team.
It is.
Oh, okay.
Well, they have 3 wins and 9 losses right now, I think.
Oh, I don't think that's going to make it. Okay. Sorry, Joe.
It's okay.
I guess they could turn it around. There's still more games to play.
Yeah. There are more games to play.
They need to win the next every game after this, probably, right?
No, I think they're already mathematically out of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's why there's always next year.
Yeah. There always is next year.
Okay, guys. Sorry. Well, I'll
Okay.
see you next week.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Well, you guys have a good Sunday. Be safe.
You
Thank
too.
you. You too.
All right,
Okay.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
now.